People are joining. We have about 126 people joining us today. So I think we're up to 77
is that
here.
all? Is that all?
What's that?
Is that
120? 126? Yeah.
Oh.
So just a few suggestions for those of you that are new to Zoom. So Cindy had a great suggestion. It takes a lot of bandwidth to have all of our faces. Not that I don't love seeing all your smiling faces, because I do love them a lot. But for the presentation, if you guys don't mind turning off your cameras, that would be awesome. It's just a suggestion. If you'd like to continue to be engaged through your camera, that's great too. And then the other suggestion would be to keep yourself on mute during the presentation as well, so there's not weird feedback while Karl is presenting. And I got a question here right out of the gate. This recording will be sent out after, so you guys can have a chance to look at that. It also will be posted on our website, as well as Colorado Mountain Club Online University. So you guys can all watch it 100 times if you want, rewatch it, Karl's amazing presentation. So thank you guys so much for joining. Looks like, let me see what our number is at. We're at 85. So I don't want to hold you guys up because I know some people have another webinar to attend. But essentially, we'll go through Karl's presentation, and then after there will be a chance to ask questions. So I have also mentioned in the chat box, please, if you have questions during the presentation, instead of just blurting them out, it would be awesome if you could just chat them, and then we can ask those at the end of the presentation. And then let's see here. Perfect. So for those of you that don't know Karl, Karl is awesome. He's been a member for 15 years. And stalling here, hold on one second. Exit. Screen, there we go. I'm stalling here 1 second because a few more people are getting added on. I don't want to start this intro. There.
Are you seeing that too? You muted.
Awesome. So like I mentioned, Karl, he's been a member for over 15 years. He's also a trip leader for the Colorado Mountain Club. Thank you, Karl, from me, and a senior instructor for the Wilderness Trekking School. He's hiked, he's a triple crowner, which I didn't know what that was until this seminar, but he's hiked the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. So do that mileage math in your head. It'll give you a headache. He's also hiked the Colorado Trail, and he's backpacked over 10,000 miles all over the West for many years. He is also, in addition to being a badass hiker, is a retired environmental scientist and a volunteer conservationist. So I'm really excited, Karl. I've been looking forward to this chat for a while. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Karl Ford.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I heard one yes. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Any problems with the audio?
Yes, we all have our mutes turned off, so anyway, yes.
Yeah, so before I start, just wanted to thank John Walters and Linda Lawson for helping set this up, and Maddie also for doing all the Zoom work to get this set up, so I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I've got a little PowerPoint. I think that you'll find it, I'm hoping that you'll find it useful. This year is so strange compared to all the other years with this coronavirus and so forth. It's going to affect, I think, a lot of our hiking plans this summer. So I actually put a slide or two in here so that we can talk about that a little bit too. So without further ado, I'll get started. And let's See if we can bring this up here. So can everybody see my screen now?
Yes, and we're seeing it not in the presentation view, by the way.
Okay.
Perfect. Looks great.
Should be good now. Maddie, I don't know if you're seeing these photos of some of the people on the right side or not. Do I need
Yes.
to make those go away?
No, I don't see yours. It'll just populate
Okay.
automatically, but if they're bothering you, you can minimize them.
I see. Okay, so the title of the talk is Long Distance Hiking. And in particular, I'm going to kind of focus on lightweight tips for hiking some of the long and national scenic trails. And by way of sort of introduction here, here's some of the topics that I'm going to cover. I'd like to talk a little bit about trail planning, and that'll sort of lead into some of the social aspects of long distance hiking, which sort of lends itself to a discussion about the coronavirus and how that might affect our plans for this summer. And I'll get into a bunch of other more traditional topics about long distance hiking. I'll talk about trail food. I'll talk about resupply. I'll talk about trail towns, trail angels, a little bit of etiquette in town. I'm going to cover conditioning, navigation, gear, water, sanitation, and some other trail risks. So it's kind of a lot, but I think I've been able to squeeze it down to probably about 40 minutes or so. And we should have plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to start off with long trail planning. I started doing long trails, I guess, around 2008 with the Colorado Trail. And after I retired, I had an opportunity to hike a lot more long trails. And I first did the Appalachian Trail in 2013 as a through hike. It took me 4.5 months, and that was quite a long hike. After that, I did section hikes of the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and there are 8 other national scenic trails. And there's a website hosted by the Park Service, the National Park Service, if you're interested in looking at some of the other national scenic trails. I think a lot of people don't even know about those other trails. The Colorado Trail is in our own backyard. It's not on the National Scenic Trail list, but I'll talk somewhat about it as we go along. If you're going to hike, one of the things to think about on a longer hike is, do I want to do it all in one chunk, or do I want to break it up into section hikes? And it has a lot to do with how much time you have available. Maybe if you're working, like I was working when I did the Colorado Trail, so I section hiked it in little pieces, and it took me 3 years. I have another friend who did the Pacific Crest Trail and took him 19 years. So it's perfectly fine to nibble away at it and take your time. And it's also, you know, a really interesting experience to do the through hike. And I've done both, and there's, you know, pros and cons of both, but it kind of comes down to how much time and determination you have. One thing about section hiking is the logistics of getting to and from the trail are multiplied by the number of sections you're going to break it into. So on the Colorado Trail, I probably did at least 10 different hikes. And, you know, that's a lot of to and from the trailhead. So you can imagine that the logistics are something. Plus the conditioning, the more sections you break it down to and come back home and get out of shape, and you have to kind of recondition. So that's an issue, or can be. Or you can do multi-day backpack trips like a lot of people do. In fact, probably most folks on the webinar today have done multi-day backpack trips. And you can certainly do that on any of these trails as well. Most of the trails have guidebooks, websites, Facebook groups. Some of the guidebooks that I like, there's one called Yogi's Guidebooks for the 3 big trails, the 3 longest trails. On the Appalachian Trail, there's one by AWOL. There's the Colorado Trail Data Book, which is really good. So the more time that you spend really kind of studying the trail and where you're going to get on and get off, and where you're going to resupply, what your itinerary is going to be, and what conditions you can expect, the more effort you put into the research, I think the better you're going to do. Plus, it's a lot of fun. So in the winter and early spring, you're doing all your preparations and the anticipation's building, and it's kind of a good thing to do in the off season. Also, food resupply. So where are you going to get off trail to resupply? Where are the trail towns? Are you going to use the local grocery, or are you going to ship a food box to the post office, or some combination? I've done mostly combinations of both. And so I'll plan it ahead of time. With these guidebooks, you can find out what towns are big enough to have a grocery store and which ones are too small and you might want to or have to mail a food box through the post office. And so I always use those priority mail boxes. They're coming 3 different sizes, but I've used the large one for a longer, like 5 or 6 days, and the medium size box for like 3 days. So logistics, I already kind of alluded to, getting to and from the trail. If you're going to be doing like a section hike or even a through hike, you're going to have to, and for me, I was like flying to the eastern United States for the Appalachian Trail. I'm flying home. And likewise for the Pacific Crest Trail and some of the CDT, I had some fairly long trips to get to and from the trail. So I would fly, I'd take the bus, I took the train, did just about everything to figure out how to get to the trail. Sometimes I had people, friends, family who would also drop me off. I found it really helpful to plan an itinerary ahead of time. And I would put it in a spreadsheet in Excel, and I would figure about how many days from resupply point to resupply point. And that's a function of the mileage between the 2 towns and maybe the conditions and how many miles per day you feel comfortable hiking. And that would tell you how many days worth of food you would need if you're going to be mailing boxes. So I put all that in my spreadsheet, like I need a 5-day food box and it needs to be shipped out by such and such a date so I can pick it up on such and such a date. So I found that doing that kind of planning was real helpful to me. I kind of skipped over this very first bullet here, why long distance hiking? And I should have hit that first because it's kind of the essence of why I do it and why I think other people do it. And I've asked a lot of people on these trails, why are you doing this? And I've asked myself that, of course. And for me, I think one of the biggest points here is the adventure of it. To get away from our regular life, city life, work, you know, everything that's going on in your city life, to get out and get into mostly wilderness conditions and to live out there for days, weeks, months even. A lot of people do it to get fit. I think after I've been hiking for maybe a month, I'm probably as fit as I've ever been in my life. And at my age, I think it's really good for me health-wise to stay fit as much as I can throughout the year, but especially get in really great shape when I can in the summer. Other people do it to escape. So if you've seen some of the movies or read some of the books on the PCT or the Appalachian Trail, one of them, remember, was, let's see, Wild, Lost But Found on the Pacific Crest Trail. It's a good example where a lot of people out there, especially younger people, are trying to get away from a lot of problems in their life. whether it's drugs or alcohol or divorce or other family problems or job problems. They're not sure, maybe it's a job situation, they're quit their job and they're not sure, what they want to do for the rest of their life. And so a lot of people get out there hoping, I think, that the trail's going to tell them what to do with their lives, or at least help them straighten out their things that are going on in their life. There's a lot of that. I also do it for the beauty. Every day is beautiful scenery, beautiful wildflowers, wildlife, birds. I just, that's a major factor for me. The solitude is another big one for me. You get out on some of these long trails, even the more popular ones, like the 3 big ones, and there'll be days when you don't hardly see anybody. So it's a very peaceful experience most of the time. And then there's the social aspects, which is kind of leads me into the next slide. Particularly in the beginning of the trailheads of these long trails, like if you start the AT or the PCT, well, let me back up. The AT starts in Georgia. The PCT and the CDT in the south start in the Mexican border. And there are a lot of folks in the springtime heading out then, particularly on the AT and the PCT. This year is an exception. Most of the trails are closed. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So this is more about the social aspects. I have done a lot of solo hiking. I've also done on these trails. I've also done a lot of hiking with maybe one partner and even small groups of 3, 4, 5. And there's kind of pros and cons. Obviously, a lot of people tell us, oh, never hike alone. Well, I think if you have the experience and the right equipment and you've done your preparations, it's fairly safe to hike these trails. If you do get into trouble, there's some things that you can minimize your risk even if you're alone. For instance, I carry a satellite communicator. If I'm alone and I need help, I can activate that. There's some other things I'll talk about as we go along to minimize your risk, but I personally think it's fairly safe to hike these long trails alone if you're experienced. Clearly, it's safer though to be in a small group, hiking at least with one partner and even several people. I don't like to hike with more than about 4. It just gets to be a little bit too noisy and you kind of miss some of the solitude that way. And the other thing about hiking in a group versus hiking solo, when you're hiking by yourself, you can set your own pace. You can start and stop when you want. You can stop and take photos. You don't have to worry about holding up the group. You've got to take a nature break, or the group is maybe going too fast or too slow. So there's some things to consider there. Likewise, in a group, then there's questions about, does everybody plan on get off on the same resupply town or not? Some people might have food for just 2 days, and some people maybe have food for 5, and they're not going to get off at that next town. Maybe they're going to go on to the next resupply point. So there's things to consider in hiking with a group. A couple of notes here on companions. Overall, it's safer to have some. Couples and family groups, here's a distinction I'd like to make. So if you have a committed couple or a family group, you are not going to split up. You're going to stick together pretty much at all costs. But sometimes you might find yourself hiking with some friends, maybe CMC friends or other hiking friends. Or maybe it's somebody, an old college friend from across the country, and you're going to meet at the trailhead. And you start hiking and you find out, oh my God, this person is so slow or so fast, or not what I expected. This is just not working out. Maybe maybe they're complaining, they don't have the right equipment, whatever. Sometimes those kind of arrangements, somebody will bail out. And so you need to be able to, if you're in that kind of situation, you really need to be self-sufficient so that like you're not sharing a tent, for instance, and your friend has a tent and he wants to bail out and you want to keep hiking. So there's issues like that to kind of figure out. So kind of consider your hiking history together. If people split up, that's a consideration and can be a concern. Right here, though, a fairly common thing here is to meet people on the trail. So in all three of my long trails, I started out alone. And it's very common to meet up with other people and to hike together as a small group or with one friend or two that you've met on the trail. And some of the things that I look for is, does this person, besides are we compatible friendship-wise, do we hike about the same pace? Do we like to start and stop about the same time? If you're not compatible in those ways, then you're not going to really be good partners. There's a lot of people who, like me, who like to head out at the break of dawn and hike all day until dinner time and maybe even sometimes after dinner. Other people may not want to start so early. They might want to sleep in a little bit or maybe stop in the middle of the afternoon. So those are considerations. If you do try to make the effort, though, you can really meet people on the trail and develop some lifelong friendships. If you try, you have to put a little bit of effort out, but for the most part, people I've met on the trail are very friendly and, happy to really kind of bend over backwards to incorporate you into their group if you want. A lot of the hikers will give each other trail names. My trail name is Speed. Most people get their trail name from another person, and they're oftentimes a funny name that sort of popped up based on experience on the trail, like, oh, you're so-and-so, we're gonna call you that. For instance, I hiked with this guy who had a long beard and longish hair, and we stopped on the PCT, we stopped in the little town of Big Bear, and there was a hostel there, and there was this Daniel Boone cap, this raccoon kind of furry cap hanging on the wall there. And so he put it on his head, and I took a picture of him, and I said, man, you look like Daniel Boone. And from then on, he became Boone. Boone was his trail name. And there's a lot of others I could tell you that are pretty wild as well. But there's one of my good friends that I met, was a fireman. He's now working he's an emergency responder near Boston, Massachusetts, and he's picking up a lot of patients with coronavirus and taking them to the hospital. So he's really having a tough time, but I really appreciate his service. But anyway, his name that he chose, or somebody gave to him, I'm not sure, was Endless P Summer. And I asked him what the P was for, and he said, perfect. So, there's lots of names like that. So I wanted to talk, before we got any further, about this virus situation. It's kind of like the 500-pound gorilla in the room with everybody, and where we are with our lives right now, and what we might expect in the summer as the year progresses. Most of the long trails are closed. I've been checking in with their websites in March and now into April. And the Colorado Trail is not officially closed, but the other trails are pretty much closed, the three main trails. So you really need to check conditions on these trails before you make any final plans to travel. These stay-at-home orders or safer-at-home orders, they were in every state. Some states are starting to lift them. They're going to pretty much tell us whether or not we even have a chance of hitting a long trail this year. Likewise, some of the public land agencies, because of the limited people they're going to have in the field, they've just gone ahead and put out fire bans like now, instead of waiting until fire conditions get hot and dry. I think we're going to see some phase reopenings of our economy and of our travel, but just need to check those conditions before you make huge commitments to travel. So if the trails do, quote, open, can you hike safely? And I have some suggestions if you decide that it's safe. So one thing you can do is keep the numbers down, either hike solo or with a safe companion who you can trust is non-infectious. You should assume that other hikers could be asymptomatic and they could be infectious. So you need to social distance from strangers. And you know, this 6-foot social distancing that we've been told to use, that's just not, you know, that's like a compromise. That's not really scientifically defensible, especially on the trail where people aren't wearing masks. Even hiking and walking around town here, I've been staying at least 30 to 50 feet away from other people, and I wear a buff, so I'm covering my nose and mouth. I've also worn a bandana. So stay away from strangers on trail and in camp. Space your tents. On the Appalachian Trail, they have these 3-sided log shelters. There's like 280 of them that a lot of people stay in. I would not stay in a shelter probably at all this summer on the AT, even if they open up. When I was on the Appalachian Trail in 2013, there was an outbreak of norovirus. And when I was in the Great Smokies National Park portion, it was mandatory that everybody stay in the shelter. And this one guy started throwing up in the middle of the night, and it was, oh my God. So a couple of friends and I bailed out of there at first light the next morning. So wash hands often with soap. Carry sanitizer too when you don't have the time maybe to wash with soap and water, but wash frequently. As far as outhouses, they're commonly found on these trails, at least the Appalachian Trail, not so much on the PCT and CDT, but I would beware of all surfaces in any kind of a building, even picnic tables. You should have to assume that the person who was last there ahead of you was infected and may have left the virus on the surfaces or on the picnic table. So it's especially important after using those kind of facilities to wash up well. In town, I would carry and wear a mask, and preferably like a good surgical mask or some kind of a good, fairly tight-fitting mask. The N95 masks are the best, but they're in real short supply right now. And when you're not using it, just keep it in a Ziploc bag and keep it clean, and you can reuse it and rewear it for quite a long time. And don't share it. It's, you know, there's no reason why it couldn't last you for a long time on the trail. And maybe periodically, if you're mailing food boxes, you know, stick a new mask in there. When you hitchhike, and if you're in town indoors, I would consider wearing some kind of a face cover. No handshaking, no sharing of food or water or tents, except for maybe with that committed partner or family member that, you know, is part of your household. And even your mailed food boxes might be safer than buying a bunch of food packages in a grocery store in so-and-so town. What we've been doing here after going to the stores, we bring stuff home, and then we have a bleach solution in a spray bottle, and we spray some rags and we wipe down all of the food containers that we bought to disinfect them. So you could do that, pack up your food box and seal it well, ship it to yourself out on the trail, open it up and know that the contents are going to be clean. Whereas if you're buying from the grocery store out on the trail, you might have to try to find a way to, if this is important to you, find a way to disinfect the containers. Consider that there may be county or town closures and restrictions. They may not even be letting you in town. I mean, we have a couple places in counties here in Colorado, Chaffee County, Gunnison County, which basically have closed their doors to any visitors. that'll probably start to loosen up soon, but part of your research, you need to figure that out. And even if you can go in town, or the restaurant's going to be open, the grocery stores will probably be open, I would avoid hostels. I would probably tend to avoid restaurants. Normally, it's such a good thing to hit town after being on the trail for 5 days, and you really want to load up on food. And boy, you can't believe, I'll talk more about this later in a few minutes, how much you just dream about having restaurant meals. But just be really careful. And if you do go to restaurants, I would probably wear a mask except for right when I'm eating. Another thing to consider is the hospitals and ICU beds along the way. I checked, for instance, on the Colorado Trail. Between Denver and Durango, there's only 3 trail towns with ICU beds. And altogether, they only have about 15 ICU beds. And they really need to be saving those beds for the locals. And, if thousands of people are descending on these trails like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, they really don't want a lot of sick people coming in off the trail and taking up their hospital space and their ICUs. So at least be aware of that and try to be sensitive about that. Hitchhiking is part of long distance hiking, and I'm going to talk more about it. I have another slide on it. Expect difficulty in getting a ride. People aren't going to want to pick you up. It's a lot of people don't like to pick up hitchhikers, period. And then you add in the coronavirus on top of that, and they're not going to probably want to pick you up. But if I was hitchhiking this summer, I clean myself up, try to make myself as presentable as possible, and I put my mask on to show the driver that, I am sensitive of him or her, and I don't want to spread my germs. It's just, to me, it's almost a matter of respect. If you get exposed to a person that has the virus, or you think has the virus, or if you yourself develop symptoms, then you need to quarantine or isolate. Quarantine in the first case and isolate in the second case. If you're on the trail, the townspeople aren't going to really want you coming into town unless you can go directly to their hospital. You don't want to go into town sick and go to a restaurant or go to a hotel or anything like that. It may be best just to call home and have someone pick you up. If you're from Colorado and you're out in Pennsylvania on the Appalachian Trail and you get sick, you need to think about and plan ahead. Like, all right, how would I get home if I have to get home? If in doubt, stay home. So kind of going back up here to the top of my slide, suggestions that if you decide it's safe, ultimately people will make their own decisions about everything in their life. They're going to follow, for the most part, the directions of our elected officials. Some people don't, but most people do. But I do think that there'll be some loosening of the restrictions this summer, maybe not until later this summer, but you're going to have to make your own decision if you think it's safe. So I'm going to move on to some more traditional topics for long distance hiking, talk about food, trail food. So there are folks out there who have a fairly standard diet. There are vegetarians out there, there's vegans out there, people with other kinds of dietary restrictions. Be aware that some of these small town grocery stores have very limited selections. If you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you're probably you may have trouble finding the kind of food that you want or need. So you might find yourself having to mail food boxes more often to yourself. And I've been in a bunch of little trail towns where all there is a convenience store. And you know what the food in those places are like. The snacks are good. They have a place on the trail, but to try to find something healthy is going to be more difficult. My second bullet here is, are you a foodie who really likes to have high quality, very tasty food on the trail? Or are you more just kind of efficiency oriented and you're just refueling? I kind of fall into the second group, at least on the trail. And then when I get to town, historically, I've gone to town and I just binge eat at restaurants. And I've already said that I would probably do that differently this summer. So that's going to kind of guide some of your choices about food. From an efficiency standpoint, what I've normally done is I'll have like mountain house dinners, but I'll have pretty much grocery store dried foods for breakfast, like granola and oatmeal and Pop-Tarts, hate to admit that. Maybe hot chocolate, coffee in the morning. And then lunches, I'll have, crackers and cheese, or usually some kind of dried fruit and some sort of chips. I like chips because they give you electrolytes plus calories, and more about that in a minute. So and then I have a lot of snacks that I bring along, bars and different kinds of bars, because I get tired of eating the same kind of bars all the time. So next point I'd like to make has to do with your caloric requirement. So you're sitting at home planning your food, and maybe planning your food boxes, trying to decide, how much food do I need to ship for 3 days or 5 days? And so I'm going to try to give you a little guidance on that. So the average male hiker, who's like, 170 pounds, needs about 2,000 calories per day for basal metabolism. That means just sitting around in the office, working in an office environment, and the rest of the time, you're driving to and from work, you're sitting at home watching TV, you're sleeping. So that's about 2,000 calories a day for, an average male. Obviously, if you're a smaller person or a larger person, you have to adjust that up or down. So once you start hiking with a backpack, you're going to add on top of that about 200 calories per mile. So if you follow the math along with me, in a 20-mile day, that's going to be 20 times 200, which is 4,000 calories, plus the 2,000 basal metabolism. So you're looking at maybe 6,000 calories in a day. And even more if you're doing really big climbs. I've had some days where I've done 8,000 vertical feet in a day. So, not all at once, it's like up and down. Plus you got a pack. When you head out of town for 5 days, you're going to be carrying 5 days worth of food plus water. So you've got that pack weight to deal with. And in some cases, on these long trails, you have snow travel. And if you've done any post-holing, up and down mountains with a backpack on, it's just exhausting and you're going to burn a ton of calories. So that's something else to consider. And so the next step here, we're going to actually determine how much weight in ounces or pounds we need. So generally, I say, and most people who've studied this will say, you need about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of dry food per day. That's 22 to 32 ounces. More on the smaller end if you're a smaller person, less than that average male. And maybe bigger on even more than 2 pounds if you're a 6'3" and 230-pound guy. So this is just a range. So we want to take a look at some different foods here. I'm a fan of high calorie dense foods. So things like peanut butter and nuts and chips and chocolate. And I've made a list of them down here at the bottom. Cooking with olive oil. Those are all tend to be like greater than 180 calories that should be per ounce down here at the bottom. So if you've got if most of your food averages 180, which it won't, but if it did, a 22 ounces of food will give you 4,000 calories. 32 ounces of food is going to give you 5,760. And I just said for an average male, he may need up to 6,000 calories a day. So you're already kind of looking at a deficit here. Yes, you can carry more food, but to be honest with you, you get kind of tired eating the same old things, and you don't want to carry 10 or 15 pounds worth of food. At least most hikers don't. I don't. So I don't usually carry like the full amount there. I usually carry between, well, around 4,000 to 5,000 calories if I'm going to be doing long distance hiking. I'm a little lighter though. I weigh about 145, and I'm older, so I don't burn as many calories as like a male who's 170 pounds and is in his 20s. A more typical average for your food would be about 120 calories per ounce. And if you multiply that times 22 ounces, which is a pound and a half, or 32 ounces, which is 2 pounds, then you're even going to have fewer calories, 2,600 to 3,840. So, the calorie density does give you an advantage. You want to consider taking more calorie dense foods. Over time, so I did the Appalachian Trail in 4.5 months. And over time, you're going to have a calorie deficit long before 4.5 months. Hiker hunger kicks in about 2 weeks, and it is a beast. You're just constantly hungry, although you also get tired of the same old bars and food, but you are so hungry. And when you get to town, what I usually do is binge eat, which is what I mentioned over here. And I also try to get as many fresh foods as I can when I'm in town. So even if I go into town for an overnighter, I might eat 5 meals and load up on fresh foods, vegetables and salads and stuff like that, plus things like pizza and milkshakes and sodas. I drink sodas when I'm hiking. I don't normally drink them in the rest of my life. So here's just a listing of some calorie-dense foods. Take a look at the ingredients of everything that you buy. Seriously, for the bars that you're looking at that you like, for the Mountain House dinners that you like, look at the calories per ounce. And that will help tell you a lot about how much food you're going to need. The Mountain House meals are not that high in calories. So be aware of that. So speaking of food and kind of talking about resupply and trail towns, a number of thoughts on that. So my typical regimen when I get to town, I call these town chores. I'm going to resupply, either go to the grocery store or go to the PO and pick up my food box. I want to get a bunk and a shower. I want to charge my electronics, and more about that in a little bit. And I'm going to eat pretty much as I possibly can, because that hiker hunger and that deficit that's been accumulating on the trail really shows up, especially in men. I've noticed that their upper bodies over weeks and months, unless they were really overweight to begin with, their upper bodies tend to get really thin and emaciated. All the body's resources go to the legs, which is what are needed to power you along. And your body is actually cannibalizing muscle, especially in the upper body. And it's going to burn all your body fat off as well. So expect problems this summer with resupply. Expect that the restaurants might be closed or limited. Grocery stores should be open. Be sure that you social distance and pull that mask out when you go into an indoor establishment. And when you get out of that establishment, wash your hands or use hand sanitizer. If you're mailing, use your itinerary and those spreadsheets to determine what foods and how much in terms of days and ounces and calories per day. So I actually figured this stuff out. I mean, I didn't get it down to the gnat's eyelash, but I had a general idea about, I certainly knew how many days worth of food I had needed, and as I packed up my box, I weighed it. I weighed the box. I weighed the box empty, and then I weighed it full so that I knew exactly how much food was in there. Keeping in mind, there's a lot of packaging, a lot of paper and plastic and stuff, but it's not very heavy. So mostly what's going to be in there is food. And so like for a box of 5 to 6 days, if I'm carrying 1.5 pounds per day in that box, then my box is going to weigh, what, 5 times 7.5 to, well, almost to 8.5, 9 pounds worth of food. I can use a medium box for 3 days, a large box for the 5 days. And about the most I ever carry is about 6 days. I've never been in a situation where I needed more. I know there's one long stretch on the PCT in the Sierras that's over 200 miles. And most hikers hit it in the snow, and you're going to need a lot more food to get through there. But there are 1 or 2 little tricks to resupply in that particular location. Also, you want to add in some other consumables like toilet paper and your meds, and sanitizer, sunscreen, maps. Put them in there so that you're constantly resupplying that, not having to necessarily carry maps for 2,000 miles. Stove fuel is difficult to ship. It's not impossible, but very few people know how to do it correctly. And if you don't do it correctly and mislabel your package, you not only package may not ever get there, but also there are some criminal penalties for shipping hazardous materials incorrectly. You can usually find stove fuel on the trail in the trail towns, whether it's propane, isobutane, those canisters. A few people use alcohol stoves. Those are about the only kind of stoves. I kind of skipped over one thing another slide or two ago, but some people don't even cook. They've tried it, they've decided it's too much of a hassle. They don't want to carry the stove, they don't want to carry the fuel, and they just eat cold food. Some of them will rehydrate vegetables in like a peanut butter jar, a plastic peanut butter jar. So some of the hardcore people don't cook. I personally do like to have a hot meal in the evening, and maybe in the morning if it's like super cold out. I'd like my coffee to be hot. I've already mentioned if you shop in town, the selection might be limited, oftentimes mostly junk food. And you got to wonder about how clean all those packages are, especially with this virus situation. And you might want to figure out a way to, maybe you're in a group of people and you buy a small bottle of bleach and you dilute it with water, 4 tablespoons per liter, makes a good disinfection, and maybe you clean off your food packets that way. Or maybe you don't care. Typically, I have to hitch to town unless I'm being supported. Mostly, I've never not been supported. If you have friends or family who can take you to town, that's great. But most likely, you're going to have to hitchhike into town. And again, I'll have more to say about that later. It may be difficult to get a ride this year, and you might end up having to make some other plans, but more about that in a few minutes. Not sure if you know what trail angels are, and there may not be very many trail angels or trail magic out this year. But a trail angel is a person who, there's a couple different kinds, but mainly it's a person who puts like a cooler full of drinks and snacks out on the trail somewhere for the hikers, free. And sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not. There might just be a cooler sitting out there in the woods on the trail with a little note saying, help yourself through hikers, or CDT hikers. And if they're there, you want to be really, thank them. It's a nice gesture. Some of the Long Trail Associations are discouraging it because people leave these styrofoam coolers out, bears get into them, tear them all up, and take trash all over the woods. So trail angels, if they're going to be out there, they hopefully are there kind of watching the food and drinks they're leaving out. But with the virus, there's probably going to be a lot less of that going on. When I hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2013 in the South, I probably had trail magic 40 times at least. And as I moved north, it got less and less and less until it pretty much disappeared by the time I got into New England. A little bit about etiquette going into town. Clean up a little bit, as much as you can. A quick story. So a friend of mine on the AT and myself were staying at a church hostel in Massachusetts, I think, or maybe Connecticut. And we got to the church hostel. They didn't have a shower. They said, you guys can sleep there for free in the basement. So we put out our pads and our sleeping bags and stuff, and we got ready to go get some dinner. And I went to the bathroom and did a little sponge bath and cleaned up as much as I could, knocked off a few whiskers. And I went on down to this Italian restaurant, and he came in a few minutes later. I'd kind of already ordered, sitting at the bar, and he sat down beside me. I'd saved a seat, and he wasn't there 5 minutes. And the bartender came in and said, "You have to leave," pointing to my friend. Says, "You smell really bad." And my friend got really offended. But you know, we have to recognize as hikers that these merchants have other guests and other customers besides us, and we need to put on as clean of appearance as we can. We need to leave nice tips for the wait staff. We want to have good relationships with these trail towns. We want them to continue to, you know, support hikers and want us to come. A few people can kind of ruin it for the rest of us if we get a bad name. So think about your etiquette in town. Don't just start plugging in all of your electronics without asking somebody. And just don't go turning on their hose or their water spigots without asking. And don't yard sale your gear in front of a bunch of customers in front of the grocery store. A yard sale is, okay, I've come through rain for 3 days and all my gear is wet and I need to dry it out in the sunshine. And we call that a yard sale. And you shouldn't do that in front of an establishment. If you need to do it in the city park, or a vacant lot, or around the trailhead, but don't do it there. So I'm going to move on to conditioning. Keep in mind, keep writing those questions in the chat box as we go along. We should have plenty of time to go through those. So starting off, if you're going to tackle a long trail or even a section of a long trail, is get a physical and be in good shape. Make sure that you're healthy enough to go off and go do this. Cardio training can be accomplished at our altitude probably in a couple of weeks if you put your mind to it. Cardio is actually the easiest part, and I'm going to suggest that you try to train for about 50 miles per week for a couple of weeks and do a shakedown backpack. And in addition to that, or part of that, maybe you go out and you do an overnighter and you do a couple of big days. And so over here on the right side, I've kind of given you a little example of how you can build your mileage up. This helps not only with your cardio, but also with the rest of your musculature to make sure it gets into proper shape. So we're starting off, in the first couple of days, we're only going to do, medium level distances. Maybe we're going to do 8 or 10 miles. And I realize to some of you, you consider that a pretty big day right there. I will say that jumping down here a little bit, conditioned hikers on long trails do 20 to 30 a day. And I know that sounds ridiculous probably to a lot of people, but if you do lightweight packing like I've talked about, and you get in good shape, you can do it. I'm still doing it and I'm 68, although I'm lucky that I have good health. So if I was going to go out on a section hike or a longer hike this summer, this is what I try to do, is take a couple of medium hikes consecutively and then take a day off. Think about what's going on in your body. So you're damaging tissue, muscle tissue, and bones and tendons and ligaments by getting out there and hiking 8 or 10 miles. And you're going to give yourself a day for your body not only to recover, but to start building up and repairing and making stronger those muscles. And also give your cardio and your heart a rest day. And then we're going to bump it up a little bit more, maybe go 12 and 14, and we come back, instead of taking a total day off, we'll take maybe just an easy hike this day. And then we come back, we do a little more, and then we do a little bit less, etc. So we're here at the end of, say, 2 weeks, we built up to 20 miles. And I realize some of you could probably go out and do a 20-miler today, but other people probably need to build up to that. Or maybe that's not even a goal of yours, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying you need to do 20 or more miles per day. I'm really not. You should go out and hike what you want to hike. There's a saying in the community, hike your own hike, HYOH. And if you're perfectly happy hiking 10-mile days, do it. There's nothing wrong with that. So toughening your feet and your tendons and ligaments takes longer. It can take a month of daily hiking. And so don't expect necessarily that you're going to be doing 20 plus miles right off the bat. Day after day after day after day, is what I mean. Yeah, you could go out and do a 20-miler today or tomorrow, but can you do them back to back to back to back? So you need to work into it. Even when I get up to the trailhead on a long trail, I'm still not going to start off going 20s every day. I'm going to work my way up to it. And so usually that's done at the beginning of a long trail. You go through some kind of a similar regimen, maybe not taking as many short days, but not overdoing it either. And there's a good reason for that, which I'll say in a minute. Keep your mileage lower in the beginning. Start out maybe around 12 miles a day. This is not preconditioning. This is actually out on the trail. And then work up from there to whatever you're comfortable with. As I mentioned, conditioned hikers can do 20 to 30 a day. And remember, these are on trails that are generally in good shape. We're not talking about doing 14ers here and bushwhacking up over boulder fields and scree and so forth. Usually the trail conditions are good. You will encounter snow conditions oftentimes if you do enough long trails. And that can be, much more strenuous. But for the most part, the trails are nicely graded, switchback. Yeah, there's a lot of climbing, but the trails are really in pretty good shape. So if you fail to work up to it, people get overuse injuries, things like shin splints and muscle or tendon strains and stress fractures and plantar fasciitis and blisters. Half of all thru hiker attempts fail, either because of some kind of an injury or some sort of mental decision that, hey, this is not for me. I'm not enjoying this. I'm going to go home. So this is a pretty important point. If you're going to be doing a long hike, is to build your mileage up. Light packs and trekking poles and trail shoes, not big heavy boots and not waterproof leather boots, can actually allow you to double your mileage compared to maybe what you've done in the past. I've backpacked for many years, and back as a young adult, I might carry a 50-pound pack. I did carry 50-pound packs, and I don't do that anymore. My pack weighs with food, between 15 and 20 pounds. And what I've found is I can double my mileage and really increase my enjoyment a lot. I don't have aches and pains. My attitude is a lot better. I'm enjoying it. Okay, so that's conditioning. A little bit on navigation. So I'm a wilderness trekking school instructor, and we teach map and compass, and I do believe in maps. I usually do carry maps. Most long trails have map sets. So you get them in 8.5 by 11, pages, color, two-sided. And for instance, I bought them for the PCT and also separately for this Continental Divide Trail. And there's over 400 pages of maps. You do not want to carry 8 pounds of paper with you. So what I would do is take the appropriate maps and put them into my food boxes. And I would have the next set of maps ready for me. And I would dump the old maps after that was done with them. I carry a compass, but I don't often use it. Occasionally I might use it just to make sure that, yeah, I'm really headed in the direction I think I am. I can usually tell from the sun, you know, what my direction of travel is. But it's good to carry a compass with you. I always carry one with me. And then there are these larger formats that I'm sure you're all familiar with, like the Trails Illustrated maps, National Geo, the National Forest maps. The scale on those are different compared to USGS maps. But the problem with the USGS topo maps, the 1 to 24,000, is I can hike across one of those in a couple of hours. If I was carrying those USGS topos, I would have, instead of, you know, a map set that weighed 10 pounds, I might have 40 pounds of paper. And, you know, I just don't want to deal with that. And you really don't need it for if you're staying on trail. If you're doing off-trail travel, you do. But you shouldn't need it for this kind of travel. However, things happen out on the trail. A good example are forest fires. So you're on trail and you're in Montana, or you're in the state of Washington, or any of these states, and you hear about a forest fire out ahead, or you see a lot of smoke. Especially if you know ahead of time and you can acquire a National Forest Service map of the appropriate national forest, it can give you the side trails that you might have to use to bail out in case of a forest fire. I'm going to talk about some other navigation tools in a moment that don't tell you that. And so you need to kind of, you know, balance that off. Another example might be is you're on the PCT and you've gotten into the Sierras and you're getting into snow, and the streams are high water in June and even 1st of July. They're dangerous to ford, and there is a lot of them that are waist deep and rushing and roaring. And you just say, no, I'm turning around, or I'm getting off trail. Rather than walk back 4 days, you might decide to take a side trail that would be closer out to a road. So there is some need or some cases where a larger format map is worth using, and I have sometimes carried them. Data books are good if they're small and lightweight, like the CT data book is good. I've even on the Appalachian Trail, I got AWOL's guidebook electronically on my phone as a PDF, and that was really cool. I didn't have to, you know, I have 0 ounces of that. So that was good. Incidentally, on the AT, you don't need any real maps. The trail is blazed about every quarter mile with white vertical stripes on the trees. And so I didn't carry maps on that particular trail. I am a big fan of phone apps though, and particularly of GutHook. I'm going to show you a slide next of what those phone apps can do. I love these. They show your exact location from your GPS in your phone. And the nice thing is your phone does not have to be on regular mode. It can be on airport mode. And so I just keep my phone on airport mode all the time. And I can have my phone last from 3 to 5 days, battery-wise. And then I also carry a little backup battery. Maybe at the end of the talk, I'll show you what it looks like. It's about 2 ounces, and I can do a full charge of my phone. So I could potentially get, you know, up to 8 or 10 days with my little backup battery included. I don't carry a solar charger. They weigh 1 to 2 pounds. Why would I do that when I can carry a 2-ounce battery? But it is important to have a backup battery in case your phone dies. There's some other ways you can keep the power drain on your phone down. You should read about that online if you don't already know how to do that. There's some little tricks. But the big thing about these phone apps is you cannot be lost. You can open, if you're not sure, you open up the phone and you see the trail on your phone and you see a dot. And the dot is where you are. And if you're not on the trail, if the dot is not on trail, you're not on it. Typically, for me, what happens is I'll get to an unsigned trail junction, and there are a lot of those in the CDT, and some on the Pacific Crest Trail. And so the trail will fork left and right, or maybe be a four-way. And it's like, where do I go? And so I'll walk down what I think is the best, most likely trail, a couple of 100 feet, and I'll check my phone app. And if my dot's on the trail, I'm good. And if the dot is like not on the trail, then it's like I got to go back. So it's almost impossible to get lost with these phone apps. And they do so much more. I'll talk about in a minute. GPS, some hikers still use these. Some, maybe some of the old timers. You can download waypoints. So it used to be before cell phones smartphones came out, that a lot of hikers would take a GPS and they would download thousands of waypoints onto their GPS. And so they would open their GPS and there's no like squiggly trail on there, but there's just dot to dot to dot. And yeah, you could get through on the CDT that way, but it makes navigation actually much more challenging. So they're inferior to the phone apps. As far as navigation, there's really nothing that can replace your situational awareness and your backcountry experience. So I am constantly looking at the terrain, and I'm constantly looking, I'm in a valley, I'm headed north, I'm in a north-south valley, or there's a peak up there to my, northwest, and I expect to cross this stream in, a quarter mile, half mile, and the phone app is really great for that, and I'll show you in a minute. You want to constantly be aware of where you are, and turn around sometimes and look back in case you have to backtrack or if you got off trail, so that you can kind of know where you need to go. And finally, I carry a satellite communicator. There's a bunch of different ones out there that are available. There's the InReach, there's the Spot, there's personal locator beacons, which is what I have, and I'll show you mine near the end here. Mine is primarily just an emergency one, an emergency beacon. And if I activate it, message goes up to the satellites and then goes down to the search and rescue folks that are that have that region assigned to them. And that's all. It's like an emergency. You don't set it off because you have a sore foot and you're 30 miles from a road. You don't set it off, for any kind of a minor problem. Maybe you got wet or cold. It's basically kind of a life or death or totally immobile situation. The ones, though, the Spot and the InReach allow some more flexibility to send text messages, and you could use them in a less emergency situation. I will say, though, that their satellites are supposedly not as accurate. So these are a couple of views from the Guthook phone app. So starting in the lower right over here, this is how it presents on your phone. So the trail, this is the CDT in Colorado, is the red line. The green line is a shortcut or a cutoff or alternate trail. They're not green, it's brown. And then these little water drops are water sources. That is really good to know in dry country where the water sources are. This particular area has a lot of water on it, so it wasn't a problem. But what you can do, if you have the app live, you can click on a water source and it'll tell you more about it. And the really cool thing about Guthook is it can take crowdsourced comments about the condition or quality of the water source on a given date. So if you're going through, say, in August 3rd, And other people have added comments within the last week or so. You can, about the quality of the source or quantity. Sometimes it's a little seep, or maybe it's dried up. You can look at that in advance and know whether or not you can trust that water source. Very cool. And this is GPS marked down to like you can zoom in on this. I haven't zoomed in, and I can't do this live. These are just screenshots. But if you zoom in on it, it's accurate down to like 10 feet. So it's really, an incredible tool. These are trail junctions, and you click on that when you reach one, and it'll tell you to go left or right or straight or, whatever. And it might say, well, the right trail goes down to town, and the Colorado or the CDT goes straight. So, I mean, it's very cool. So much information. And the app also has profile views. So down across the bottom here, I have, and you can zoom this in. I've got this kind of at a macro level. So here's 20 miles, 40 miles, and be 60 miles out here. This is the climb, the vertical climb over this distance. So we're going up, we're going down, up and down, up and down. And also shows you where those water sources are. And there's some other icons, like this is a junction that goes to a town. That's what this means. So you get off here. And sometimes there's other information about campsites and historical features on the trail, that sort of thing. And you can zoom in and zoom out on this, and it'll give you, like, for this particular length here, 72.7 miles, you've got a total climb of 18,000 feet. So if let's say you're looking at just doing one day, maybe 20 miles, it'll tell you, okay, you're doing 5,280 feet in one day, which is, it's a good day, but it's not a huge day. So anyway, the Guthook app is really good. The PCT, there's a free one called Half Mile, very similar. Guthook, there's a minimal charge for maybe 20, 25 bucks but for the amount of use and information it gives you and the certainty of knowing exactly where you are. Like if I miss this turn here and I'm supposed to be going, out westerly on the red, and I'm up here, I'm here somewhere, I was like, whoops, I'm on the wrong trail. Or maybe like, oops, I'm down in here, I'm like really off base here. So it's really a useful tool to have, called Guthook. Okay, so I'm going to change gears and talk about gear. You may have guessed I'm kind of an ultralighter. I like to be 10 pounds or less. That's kind of the cutoff, arbitrary of, between ultralight and lightweight. Lightweight's kind of less than 20, and I'll say you're a mule if you're more than 20. And here we're talking about your base weight. So not adding in food or water or stove fuel. Okay, so you're ultralight if not counting that stuff, if you can weigh everything and you're under 10, etc. And really, when you think about this, you can be perfectly safe and be ultralight. You can have the right gear and pretty much be good for almost any condition. Not going to help you in a hurricane, not going to help you in a forest fire. It may not help you in a sustained blizzard of 10 days, may not be enough. But for most summer hiking, you should be able to travel with a high degree of safety and still be ultralight. And I can probably be as safe as someone who's carrying more than 20 pounds with my pack of 10 pounds. And so, one of the reasons I've already mentioned this is if you have your pack weight, you can double your distance. So I used to do that 50-pound pack when I was young and strong, and I could do it, although after 10 miles, I was pretty much ready to call it a day. But now that I carry like a 10-pound pack base weight, I can double that mileage. What to put in it? Well, you have your 10 essentials. I'm not going to go into all those details. CMC teaches that in a lot of our classes. I use trail runners to hike with. I don't use boots, and I especially don't use waterproof boots. They're okay if you're hiking a lot in snow But other than that, they're a pain in the neck. And if there's chat questions about that, we can talk about it. But I like to have my feet able to dry quickly, and I can do that with trail runners. They're light, they're tough, they give me plenty of traction. If you have like weak ankles and you need a higher ankle, you can get some trail runners with a higher ankle as well. Starting in about 2008, when I started hiking longer trails, I started using trekking poles. Thought I'd try them out because I'd never used them before. And I had become addicted to them. Wasn't crazy about them at first, but they do save a lot on the downhill on your knees, which, you know, as I'm getting older, I want to protect my knees more and more. And I also use them a lot on the uphills too. I can get a nice little push off. And I use them for my tent. They can also be a weapon if, you know, heaven forbid, an animal or a crazy person confronts you on the trail, or hitchhiking. I'll mention more about that coming up. I weigh everything, even little things. But the big four where you can make the most improvements in your weight are your pack, your sleeping bag, your sleeping pad, and your shelter. Those four items are probably going to take up as much as 2/3 of your overall weight, maybe half to 2/3. So you can make your biggest reductions here. The problem is that gear to do it is expensive. But for each of these things, I can get each of them for 1 pound or less. Sleeping bag, pad, shelter, pack. When I started doing a lot of backpacking I won't say how long ago, a long time ago, when I was out of college and in college, I had a Kelty frame pack that weighed 6 pounds empty. Now my pack weighs around 10 pounds, not counting food or water, full. So make a spreadsheet, put every item in there, list its weight, add it up, see where you can reduce, or at least where the big heaviest things are, where you can make the most gain. And, you know, maybe your budget doesn't allow for you to spend $500 on a new tent, but maybe you can make up change something else to reduce your weight. I have a spreadsheet. If you're interested, I've got some different equipment lists for different kinds of conditions and trails, and I can share that. And I'm going to have a slide coming up next, which is an excerpt from that. I'll show you. And for summer travel, even in the mountains, I just carry one set of clothes that I'm wearing. I also carry one insulating layer and a shell, which is my rain jacket. I carry gloves and a hat if I'm going to be at higher elevations where it can be colder or maybe have snow. My pack base weight is about 9 to 12 pounds base weight, BW. And if I'm out for, say, 4 days, that's about 6 pounds worth of food with 2 pounds of, 2 pounds of water, which is 1 liter. That pack is going to weigh 17 to 20 pounds. So that's kind of where I'm comfortable at. Sometimes my pack might go up 5 more pounds with some more food and maybe 2 liters of water. I have carried a lot of water on occasion. Water is the heaviest thing you carry. And I have a slide coming up on water. So this is just an example gear list of an ultralight, and I have had to work at this to get, you know, items that are this light. My sleeping bags, just over a pound. You can actually get them under a pound that are going to get you down to 20 degrees. They exist. Z-Packs is one of my favorite sites, zpacks.com. They have maybe the best lightweight sleeping bags. I also have a Z-Packs tents. I have a single tent that weighed under a pound, and now I have a double tent that weighs 19 ounces. My pack, I have several different packs, but my lightest one only weighs 12 ounces, and I can hike for up to 5 days in the summer with it. It is a pretty, you know, fragile pack. I have to be kind of careful with it. and it's not going to carry a bear canister or, you know, a lot of extra gear. So to put in a jacket, you know, 12 ounces, I'm not going to read all these. Sleeping pad, this is a half length one, thermarest. Let's see, my phone and my charger, my rain gear. I carry an Ursack, which is like a Kevlar bag for my food. I don't have to hang it up high in a tree. I can just tie it to a tree at night. I do carry stove fuel. Small essentials would be things. I have hygiene, so that's a little bit similar. My hygiene bag, I've got toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, first aid, a small a very lightweight headlamp, a small knife, etc. And I kind of confuse these between small essentials and hygiene, but so those little things are in those bags. This is my emergency beacon. I also carry a really lightweight down vest. I carry one pot and one spoon, and that's all I have for cooking gear. I usually just kind of rehydrate my food in the food container or sometimes in a freezer bag. My water bottles, battery charger, stove and bag. These are in ounces, by the way. Maps for the section I'm on. Bear rope or just some lightweight rope for whatever purpose. Gloves, tent stakes. I carry an offset food bag. That's like a large Ziploc bag. And when I hang my bear bag, my Ursack, I put this inside of it. In fact, I keep my food in there all day long. And it keeps it from getting too much food sent in my pack itself. And I think it's a good idea in bear country, which is almost everywhere we go. I carry a little MP3 with music and podcasts. I have a buff. So we're going from heavier weights down to light weights here. And there's some things probably not on this list, but this is a fairly complete list. This trowel/stake is used for digging my cat holes. It's a snow stake. It's about 12 inches long and much stronger than a regular stake. Maddie, if anybody's trying to contact me, if you're not hearing me or something, I hope you'll let me know. I could not hear that. I hope you can hear me.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, sorry, I had my headphones in. So yeah, we all can hear you really well, and a lot of people have questions, but I was just gonna wait till the end to ask those of you.
Okay, I bet I'm a little over halfway through. Okay, so you can read the rest of that, and this PowerPoint, by the way, you can get it from me later if you're madly trying to take notes or something. So Maddie, I can't advance here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so the next slide is water. You're going to need 4 to 8 liters per day, depending on conditions, how hot and dry it is, and how hard you're working. You need to know where the next water source is and how likely it's going to really be there and carry enough. You need to carry it to get to the next source. So gut hook is really good for that. If you don't use gut hook and you're kind of reduced to looking at maps and where the next streams are, and sometimes those can be really inaccurate. So I usually just carry enough to get me to the next source or to the next one after that, in case the next source turns out to be bad. Water, again, is the heaviest thing you take. I use bottles instead of bladders for a variety of reasons. If I look at bottles, I know how much I have. I can see it, I can look at it. Bladders, I've had them leak or I've had the mouthpiece fall out and water come pouring out, and I just prefer using bottles like a Gatorade bottle or Smart Water bottle, or some of the little platypus 1 liter bottles. I have those too. I filter or treat everything, and sometimes I do both. For chemical treatment, I use a little dropper bottle with bleach 2 drops per liter will disinfect your water. But on really nasty looking water, if I know in advance that I might be encountering it, like on the CDT in southern New Mexico, where you have to drink out of cow ponds, I go through like a 3-step process. I'll first grab a bunch of water in my pot and I'll let it settle for as long as I can. And I'll pour off the supernatant and I'll filter it, and then I'll treat it with bleach. There are some other things that you can use, chemical treatment as well, but I don't have time really to go into all those. I've used Aquamira and I've used some other types, but I just eventually went with bleach. It's the easiest and lightest and cheapest. On the Pacific Crest Trail and on part of the CDT, there is a water report, it's a spreadsheet, and it'll tell you about the various water sources along the way in the desert locations and what to expect. Like maybe it's a water cache, maybe it's a stream or a spring or a seep, and whether it's really flowing low or high or what. So you can get that information from the Pacific Crest Trail Association or the CDTC. Phone apps also, I mentioned, they're crowdsourced, and so you can get really current information that way as well. Dehydration. So I've encountered this. I'm sure probably most of you have on occasion. You want to avoid it by having adequate water, obviously. I'll get to a water source, and when I get there, I'm going to immediately drink all the water that I have, if it's a hot, dry environment. And then I'm going to fill up all my water bottles. And then I might stay there for 30 minutes or even longer for my new water to be treated. And then I might drink some more. So that's called cameling up. Fill up, your stomach with as much water as it can comfortably carry, and then put the rest on your backpack. For hot, dry conditions, you want to have electrolytes. That means salts, mostly sodium, but also potassium and some other minor ones like magnesium, and there are a few others. You can get that from your food usually, and I like to carry chips. And I always eat chips at lunch, and I have also carried the little tablet electrolytes or the little pouches, like Emergency has an electrolyte pouch. So if you're going to be doing some really hot desert kind of hiking, make sure you carry those. You can also avoid the heat of the day by shading up somewhere. And I've also hiked with one of those silvered umbrellas that reflects the sunlight off of me. So there's various things you can do. When I did the CDT through southern Wyoming, through the Great Divide Basin, there's 120 miles of no shade, seriously. The shade there is limited to black sage, which is only about 10 inches tall. The only other shade I could find were an occasional telephone pole. So it was good to have my umbrella. So moving on to, wow, it's really 6:28. I'm going to zip through the rest of this and leave time for questions. Most of you are aware of sanitation, leave no trace. We talked about coronavirus. Let's skip through some of this regular stuff. Going to move on. Okay, survive and thrive. A few minor remaining tips. This is the coronavirus thing. It's probably the biggest deal this summer about threat to your health. All this stuff is the same. I'm not going to talk about it anymore other than I think it's kind of a big deal. So I stole some of these from Azul. That's her trail name, from Alda West at the Rockies Ruck a month or so ago. And I'm going to just kind of hit some of these high points. I've talked about bones, joints, and tendons. Some suggestions here on getting not only decent shoes, but toughening up your feet and preventing overuse. In other words, starting out slower and building up to it. Dry your feet out whenever you can. When I take a break, I take my shoes off usually and let them dry. I carry one extra pair of socks, and I'll rotate rotate them each day, and I'll try to wash out the dirty pair, and I'll hang them on the back of my pack with safety pins so they'll dry out. Take a wilderness first aid class if you haven't already. Blisters. I usually, if it gets a lot of fluid in it, I'll drain it and I will disinfect it, and then I'll put a bandage on it. Usually the cloth ones stick better for me, or I sometimes use Leukotape, especially before the blister forms. If I have to use Leukotape after the blister, the stuff is really, really sticky, and you need to put something over the roof of the blister so it doesn't stick to that. I will usually drain the blister with, I usually carry a needle, and you can also use thread and run it through the length of the blister and out the other side, and it will continue to wick fluid out. Carry antibiotic ointment with you, and I usually carry the iodine pouches too for disinfecting. GI illness, most people, if they're not careful, are going to get a bug on the trail, whether it's Giardia or something similar. Emphasizing hand washing, using sanitizers, don't shake hands, don't stick, sometimes hikers will share food. Don't stick your hand in somebody's bag of M&Ms. You put your hands out and then let them shake some into your hands, that sort of thing. Talk to your doctor, make sure you have the right meds with you. If you have a companion, they need to probably know about your medical needs so that in case you get sick, they can help you and know about that. Snow and ice, avalanche, we have lots of classes in CMC about that. Not going to talk too much about it other than if you do a through hike on the PCT, you're going to have hike through the high Sierras in June for 300 miles of snow. And it is an experience, a difficult, challenging, but wonderful experience. And it almost can be the subject of a whole nother talk. You need to carry an ice axe for self-rest, some kind of traction devices or crampons. And the streams actually are probably more dangerous than the snow and ice is. We've talked a little bit about heat illness. Again, take that first aid class, make sure you understand what heat stress is like and how to avoid it. Electrolytes. Whenever you urinate, make sure you kind of check the condition of your urine and volume. If it's really yellow, then you're not getting enough water. This is also kind of just general stuff about wildlife and plants. I'll skip over most of this. Grizzly bears and bears, kind of a longer topic. We'll see if there's any questions on that. But on the CDT, I hiked through probably 500 miles of grizzly country. Never saw a grizzly, but I saw lots of tracks and made a lot of noise and carried bear spray. On the Appalachian Trail, ticks are a real hazard with Lyme disease, and that's a whole nother subject. I've actually written papers on that. Staying found, okay, make sure you have an emergency contact who knows about where you are at any given time and when you're expected to resurface. So I would always call my wife and let her know when I either when I had phone service or when I got back to town, so that she knew I was on schedule and I was okay. If you have one of the other communicators, then you can let them know more regularly than that. But make sure somebody knows where you are and when you're expected to be back in contact. Talked about carrying a satellite communicator, swapping out your information with your hiking partner. Hypothermia is a matter of moisture and wind and temperature. I'm not going to talk any more about that, but it can be one of the risks on the trail that you need to be careful of. If you get wet, you need to stop and get warmed up. It's that simple. Hitchhiking, single people should avoid it. Hike in small groups. Assess that person, that driver, before you hop in. maybe ask them where they're going. They might ask where you're going, and you're kind of assessing them as you go. Like, is this a safe person to hitchhike with? I always carry my trekking poles with me in the seat. Other people might have mace or a knife just to defend themselves. Um, Alternatives, you can plan ahead, use a cell phone and call a trail angel to pick you up on the long trails. You can do that. You might be able to get an Uber or a bus or walk into town. I've done all those things. That said, hitchhiking can actually be enjoyable. People are usually really curious about what you're doing, or it can be terrifying. So with that, I'm going to take some questions.
All right, and I'm gonna go through ones on the chat. If you guys could, just so everyone gets their questions answered, if you could chat, that's awesome. Let me know if you need any help with that. But let's go back up here.
I'm not seeing the chat at the moment.
So
Is there something that?
Yeah, Carl, you can, and I could just ask them for you, but if you move your mouse down to the bottom, you'll be able to see a chat little icon. Okay. Oh my gosh, there's so many. All right. So it was kind of answered, but can you just briefly go over what a shakedown backpack is?
Yeah, so a shakedown can either be done as a hike or just sit down and have an experienced person go through your pack and let you know what they think, what equipment you could have better or what's missing. Maybe you've got this 12-pound tent. You might consider getting something lighter. So you can have an experienced person help you shake down your pack. I think the backpacking section is doing one of those. Or you can go out on a shakedown hike and test out your gear if you haven't used it before.
Awesome. And yeah, they're called gear checks. So if anyone has any questions, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Linda Lawson. They're doing this really awesome program. So if you have questions about that, let us know. And if you could summarize maybe in 3 tips, some more 3 tips on your light packing. What do you do as like your 3 biggest things to make it can be?
Well, the 3 easiest ways to save weight would be on those 4 items: your pack, your sleeping bag, your sleeping pad, and your shelter. And weigh them all. And if you think that they're excessively heavy, and if you're limited on a budget, maybe figure out where the best place to target your next purchase would be.
Awesome. Good.
If I could see the questions, I could burn through them fast, maybe.
Yeah, just because I responded to a couple of them. Okay, here we go. I am hiking diagonally across Colorado along roads, any trails, and across government land and private if permission. So not an established trail much. Should I carry navigation? Does that make sense?
So the question was, they're going to be going across private land? Should I carry that?
Yes.
Well, I would never cross private land without permission.
She's saying if she has permission.
Okay. Well, then it would be the same as like any backcountry experience. You need to have maps. You need to have GPS if you can, or smartphone apps, or there's things like Gaia GPS. You can download the maps for that area onto your cell phone. So there's lots of possibilities. They're covered in WTS and some of the other CMC schools.
Awesome. And then Lynn asked you, Carl, I believe you used to use Gaia GPS. Have you stopped using this and now just use GutHook?
I use GutHook for the long trails, for where they actually have a product that covers that trail. If I'm just going out somewhere else in Colorado, then I would probably use Gaia.
Awesome. And then what type of personal locator beacon do you use?
So I have it right here. If I can get the screen back, I can show it. This is an HCR rescue link. I've got a couple of other little things show and tell. Just take a few seconds if I can get my screen back.
Yes, so you can are the only one who could stop sharing, and it's down at the bottom. Just say stop sharing. Maybe I can try to do it. Oh, here we go. I did. Okay. Can I
So this
see?
is the ACR rescue link. Can everybody see it?
Awesome.
And it weighs about 4 or 5 ounces. This is an example of the backup battery I'm talking about. Weighs an ounce or two. Some of the small filters that are out there, these are the Sawyer filters for water treatment. This is the mini and this is the squeeze. This one's better. If you're going to get one, get this one.
Awesome. And then,
Okay, I can.
so what do you bring for first aid on your really long trips?
Good question. So my partner, Ann, is a critical care nurse, and her first aid kit weighs like several pounds. Mine weighs about 2 or 3 ounces. I carry some Leukotape, some Band-Aids, a needle, some antibiotic ointment, some iodine disinfectant, I'll carry some ibuprofen, some Imodium, and maybe a few cold tablets, and that's about it. I have carried vitamins, but I don't always carry them.
Awesome. And then, is there any way to make trail runners resistant to cactus spines and rattlesnakes if hiking across a brushy desert?
No, not that I'm aware of. And I've encountered both. I've never been bitten by a rattlesnake, but you just need to be alert.
For sure. Okay, we got some more coming. Do you carry a camera or do you just use your phone? If the latter, are you happy with the quality of the images?
I just use my phone, and yes, I'm totally happy. I've taken thousands of photos on the trails, and I can take video. It's just very cool. I use my phone for so many things. I read ebooks in the tent at night. I have music on my phone. I have podcasts. It's just, plus the Guthook app. I mean, there's so many. And when you get to town, you can do email. It's a telephone. There's so many things.
Awesome. And then what is the name of the lightweight tent and bag you use?
So my tent is a Z-Packs. Go to zpacks.com. I've had several of their tents. They have really good stuff. They have good sleeping bags and packs. I have a Z-Packs pack. I also have a Gossamer Gear pack, the Murmur, which is the 12-ounce pack I mentioned.
Awesome.
I also have a Western Mountaineering sleeping bag and a Marmot 30-degree bag.
Awesome. And then with respect to hypothermia, when you say if you get wet, stop and warm up, do you also mean too sweaty?
Yeah, so especially, let's say you're hiking in you can actually be hiking in the winter and get really sweaty. I'm sure folks on the phone have had that situation where you're doing a big climb in the wintertime and you allow yourself to get really sweaty. I try to slow down so to where I'm not sweating in the wintertime. If you do, you're going to get your base layers, your underlying layers wet. We were going up to bar camp one time. Dean Waits is probably on the phone. It wasn't Dean, but one of the people we were hiking with. She was going really fast, leading the group, and it's like 6.5 miles up to bar camp, about 3,000-foot climb in the winter. And we got up there, and she had to take her base layers off in her wool sweater and hang it by the stove because it was just soaking wet. If you had to spend the night out or for whatever reason, you don't want those base layers to get wet.
Awesome. Thank you for that. There was another first aid question. He has a 13-ounce first aid kit, but he's solo a lot. So would love to lighten it, but doesn't want to sacrifice essentials. You kind of mentioned your essentials, but what are 2 or 3 that you definitely don't live without?
Yeah, the stuff I listed, you really need to have something to treat minor wounds with and blisters. And I haven't really ever needed anything else in 10,000 miles of hiking. It's not to say that someone could or has needed it, because they certainly have. There have been lots of serious injuries out there. I'm careful. I'm a careful hiker. But I'm not going to argue with somebody who wants to carry a 13-ounce first aid kit.
Awesome.
I see questions on Leukotape here. It's a special tape you buy online, and it's super sticky. My feet sweat a lot, so if I'm starting to get a hot spot and I put on some Leukotape, it's going to stay there till I get to town 5 days later. Whereas if I put a Band-Aid on it, it's usually going to slip off in a few hours. So it's really an amazing tape.
Awesome. And then there was one about, can you comment on the benefits of a bivy sack versus a regular tent?
So I've carried both. I have both. So my bivy sack is supposedly water. It's like a Gore-Tex bivy sack. So it's supposed to stop rain or precipitation on the outside, but still breathe. Don't believe it. I find myself really clammy in there. And then one night I was sleeping below freezing, and I woke up and there was snow inside my bivy sack between me, my sleeping bag, and my bivy sack. And what it was frozen condensation from my body. And I'm not kidding, I had 3 inches of snow in there. And a tent gives you a lot more protection. A bivy sack is more of a survival article. I had tried them on a few hikes, have slept in them,
And
but
then
I prefer shelter.
there's a question here on the single walled tent as well. Do you think that's adequate for a long distance hike?
Yeah, definitely. So all the Z-Packs tents are single wall, but they're designed with lots of ventilation with bug netting around the sides and base. And so as long as you keep a door open or one of the door flaps, you won't have too much condensation, and you can have excellent protection against rain and hail and everything you might encounter.
Awesome.
They really have good tents, some of the best lightweight tents in the world.
And then what brand is your backup battery?
So Anchor makes probably the best one. I couldn't find it, but I mean, I've got boxes of camping gear. This one's a Pocket Juice, but Anchor, I think, is a more respected brand. ANKAR.
Awesome. And then what is your profession? Just curious.
Before I answer that, I see this one. What is the funniest nickname you have come across? From Rick. Hi, Rick. Maybe I told you, Rick, about BK, Baby Killer. He's muted, but let me tell a 60-second story. So we get the black on the PCT, we get to Big Bear, that same hostel where Boone got his name. And there's a Mexican restaurant next door, all you can eat these 8-pound burritos. 8 pounds, I mean, ginormous things. And everybody's really hungry, right? So, but I was smart enough, I didn't try to do it, but 8 of us went out to dinner there, which you wouldn't do today because of coronavirus. So this one guy finishes the 8-pound burrito in like 10 or 15 minutes, and he's looking around at everybody else's plate like he wants 4, right? And by the way, if you finish the 8-pound burrito, you get it for free. So, but anyway, so someone said his name was Scott, I think, William, and he said, Scott, you finished that. It was the size of a baby, a human baby. And someone said, you ate a baby. And someone said, you're a baby killer. And so Baby Killer became his trail name. It's kind of offensive, I get it. But because it was offensive, and especially in town, we called him BK. He became BK after that.
And
you did ask
what's your
a
profession?
question, Maddie, which one? Well, I'm retired, but I'm an environmental scientist. Worked a lot in ecological planning, worked some for most of my career in environmental toxicology.
Awesome. And then Mike Miller asked, do bear bags work or only if you hang them? Could you speak to bear bags?
Yeah, so I also, this is what it looks like. It's made out of Kevlar, and you just tie it onto a tree. A bear can come up and actually grab it, but they can't penetrate it. They could maybe crunch up your food in there, but they can't get to it. And then it's tied onto a tree, so they can't walk away with it. So yeah, I'm a fan of the Versac. It's a lot easier than trying to use a rock and throw a rope up over a branch and getting a proper bear bag hung, although I've done that a lot as well.
Awesome. And then concerning your water filter, how does the squeeze bottle work, the Sawyer one?
Okay, so this is it's kind of a two-part thing. You can fill up in a platypus or a bladder with this type of opening on it, and then you just affix it to one end of the filter. So there's an arrow flow here. I don't know if you can see that. You fill this up with water and you squeeze it through into your clean bottle down below here. So that's how these little filters work. You can also use a smart water bottle up on top and then go into a clean bottle. Dirty water on top gets clean as it goes through the filter and into your clean water. Once in a while you need to backfill these because they will get clogged up.
Awesome. And then do you recommend a solar charge battery? If so, which one?
Not solar, no. I don't carry those big solar panels. They're too bulky and heavy. This little battery that I showed you, you just charge it up like your cell phone in town.
Awesome. That was the last question on the chat. Does anyone have any other questions? You can open the floor.
Yeah, if you look at some other people have helped answer these questions, and those are good too. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I just want to say thank you so much for everyone for being on this call. Karl, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation. Oh, we got one more question. Okay. Bill Oliver asked, tell us about your shoes.
So I use I like this. I'll try to be really brief. This is long, but on the AT, my feet took a pounding. I went through 6 or 7 different kinds of trail shoes and lightweight boots, and my feet were just beat up and bruised. And I thought I'd never do a long hike again. And then I discovered the Hoka shoes, and the Hokas have a fairly thick padding underneath them. And also the Ultra Olympus, both of those have fairly thick, soft soles that it's like walking on air. And I'm a real believer in those shoes. They made it possible for me to continue to hike.
And then last question is, what's your favorite trail? Good ending.
I'd probably have to say the PCT. The High Sierra section and the North Cascades section are awesome. The most beautiful hiking ever. I also did the Tour de Mont Blanc, which is a circumnavigating around Mont Blanc, which is the highest mountain in Europe. And that was a wonderful hike too.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining this event. And again, Karl, wonderful, wonderful job. I will be sending this out to everyone. And I think Karl mentioned he would send out his PowerPoint so we can connect, so I can send that to you guys. And then if you're interested, this was brought to you by our backpacking section. And if you aren't already a member of it, you can email me or go to the CMC office and join the backpacking section. They have over 900 members in it. So definitely look into them this summer for some fun trips. So, and thanks again, Karl, you're wonderful. So
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
bye guys.